So let me be very blunt. There is no greater imperative, in my view, for the European allies than simply to rearm at speed and scale. If there is anything that's going to deter Russia, it's real exercised military capabilities with appropriate air and missile defenses, system integration, finding a way to actually meld the different disparate digital infrastructures of 32 allies, and coming up with an unequivocal message that the new regional plans that NATO has can be implemented because the capabilities commitments that are required are there. Every time I'm in Europe, I preach this message to any audience that I have an opportunity to speak to. And again, this is not about percentages of GDP. Although countries along the flank are leading the way, Poland is now advocating 4%, the Baltics are stepping up, the Scandinavians. It's about what you spend that money on. If 80% of your budget goes on personnel, retirement, and other costs, and you're not really producing the real capabilities that the SACEUR can plug into his operational planning, that money, you could go to 10% of your GDP. It's the structure of what you spend on. That's the first thing. The second thing is we're paying the price for the fact that we didn't respond appropriately already in 2008, not to mention 2014. Every time he used military power, he scored a geopolitical win. I'm talking about Putin, and paid only a marginal price for that. He invades Georgia. Nord Stream 1 is completed. He invades the Syrians. He is a big player, now in the Middle East. He takes Crimea. Nord Stream is still initiated as another project. The message that was given to Russians is that the West has no willpower, and the energy dependence, his ability to manipulate the political elites to influence public debate, will allow him to get to where he needs to be. That's why I think 2022 is such an important year for us, because all of a sudden, for the first time, we stood up. We responded from the strategic gut, so to speak, and NATO is politically unified. What worries me when it comes to Ukraine and deterrence and defense is that political unity is slightly thinner than I would have wanted it to be, because when it comes to appetite for risk-taking, it depends on where you sit on the map. So when I'm in Tallinn, Helsinki, or Vilnius, or Warsaw, or Bucharest, it's Russia, Russia, Russia. They get it. I was recently in Stockholm. Same thing with the Swedes, same thing with the Norwegians. When I start moving away geographically from the flank, from the frontier, things begin to change. Germany is now no longer a frontier country. France is preoccupied with the Mediterranean. So in Paris, I hear, European southern borders now in the Sahel, it's in the Med. We need to be paying attention over there. And I sometimes joke that when I get to Portugal, I have no idea what we're talking about other than migration issues and economic development. Jokes aside, my point is the following. We need to get to a unified threat perception across the alliance, because only that will trigger genuine commitment to invest in necessary military reconstitutions. And here's the bad news. The war in Ukraine has been going on for 3 years now, okay? The Russians are now on track and at least trying to field a 1.5 million military. The Chinese People's Liberation Army is about 2 million. If you look at the sizes of European militaries outside of the flank, if you look at the stocks of munitions, they're virtually non-existent. If you look at the number of operational tanks, which are very, very few, and compare that to the level of Russian force reconstitution and how much armor they're putting back into service, relying on old stocks, some of the new production, this is going to look very, very dangerous for us. Secondly, the Russians, remember, we have 1,800 miles of NATO's border now to defend. Finland itself is 830 miles. Okay? We have no infrastructure, north-south, that is adequate to the task of military mobility across the theater. We need to invest in that. And yet, at the political level, the military side is on track. Our military gets it. They have developed the regional plans. They have capabilities, commitments attached to them. They're working on force integration and the rest of it. What's missing is political will to speak to the public in Europe and, frankly, here in the United States as well, to say how dangerous the situation is becoming. We have an ongoing war in Ukraine. We now also have a war in the Middle East. In effect, the front of confrontation with the axes of dictatorships is expanding. We may have instability on the Korean Peninsula, and then, of course, the Indo-Pacific. If you look at the size of the European militaries, they're inadequate to the task with very few exceptions. And let me say a few words about the flank. Small nations like Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, especially Finland, are doing their part. Finland is 5.5 million people. They can field an army of 280,000 at a drop of a hat. They have the largest conventional artillery. They have resilience programming built into their total defense concept. This is where the rest of the alliance needs to go. And frankly, the same goes for our own military. We're spending now roughly 3.1% of our GDP on defense. That's roughly half of what we spent during the Cold War. Our joint force is probably in NDA at about 1.3 million. It was never less than 2 million during the Cold War, roughly speaking. And if you looked at the defense spending, so we are playing catch up, and I think in large part because the 3 decades of the peace dividend were so good. And it's very hard to let go and recognize the realities on the ground, but I think it's way past time to do that.